Over the years, we've had many opportunities to play older consoles and computers using newer equipment via emulation. I remember myself many years ago enjoying games I might have missed out on or just didn't get a chance to buy, especially on consoles I might not have had myself. Since then, our options have kept growing and growing to the point now where the device you're using to watch this video likely has enough horsepower to run a myriad of classic games on it. It may not be as direct as the original experience with the tactile feel of selecting a game off a shelf, inserting it into a console and playing on a tube TV or monitor, but it sure is convenient for a quick hit of nostalgia. Beyond that, over the years we've seen a rise of cheap single-board computing devices that, coupled with some nifty software, offer sort of a mini console experience, as well as official entries thrown in by the original manufacturers themselves hoping to cash in on your nostalgia. Some good, some probably not so good. At least the box might look neat on your shelf. But something has surfaced fairly recently that may be the most exciting development in the retro gaming world, and that's FPGA platforms, and specific to this video, the MiSTer project. What the heck is an FPGA and the MiSTer, you might ask? Let's take a look. Welcome back to Rick's Random Retro, where good things come in small packages. Let's start out with some technical mumbo-jumbo first. Imagine circuits as they're printed or made from the factory. This may be chips in your phone, your computer, or even game consoles. Once the design is finalized, it's printed and it's forever in that shape. It can't be changed after it's been made and will remain in that exact specification through the life of the chip. Look at one of the chips in one of our retro computers. It's been unchanged since the day it came off the assembly line. That's where an FPGA or field programmable gate array comes into play. We won't get too deep into the technical details of how they work, because on many levels for myself it's basically sorcery how people figure these things out. In essence, it's a chip that can be reconfigured on the fly. It's frequently used by manufacturers to design and test chips instead of printing prototypes over and over, or where a custom design may be cost prohibitive. Applying what could be considered a map to an FPGA chip, you can reconfigure it to mimic exactly the sort of chip you want, with some restrictions mostly based on the amount of space on the FPGA chip in question. From a retro perspective, FPGAs have become very popular because instead of custom making a chip that would go into, say, an aftermarket Amiga accelerator card or a flash cartridge for your favorite console, you can leverage an FPGA chip instead. Open up just about any high-powered flash card these days and odds are you'll find an FPGA chip inside. It allows ultimate flexibility from the developer to truly define what they want the chip to do on the hardware layer. New features can be unlocked by the developers, such as support for additional custom functions, save states, or whatever they can dream up. Speaking to retro gaming, what is so different with an FPGA device versus, say, what a Raspberry Pi does? It uses a single chip for most of its function, and it plays classic games really well with a similar result. What it comes down to is how you get to that end result. Software emulation, like the fan-favorite Pi, and more specifically the RetroPie project, is replicating the result. You're playing your favorite game, but it got there by translating everything in software. A Super Nintendo was never designed to run on the chip that powers the Pi, so some very smart people have written the software that handles the translation between the game software or emulator with the chip. That's what software emulation really is in the simplest term, translating something to run on something else via the use of software. And for the record, I love software emulation. I use it, have used it, and plan on continuing to use it for a long time forward. There are some amazing things coming out on the software emulation front, especially looking at some newer consoles. There are now ways to run things like a PS3 emulator on your computer, which is like crazy. But it got there via some pretty clever shortcuts and tricks. Alright, software emulation is great, so what's the big deal with an FPGA? Well, before we get there, software emulation has some specific things that work against it. The primary thing is lag. Since there's a translation happening on the fly, there will always be some delay involved. Add things like a slow TV panel and maybe Bluetooth controllers and it starts adding up. You may feel sometimes playing some games, especially ones that require very tight reaction windows, things just feel a bit off. You may miss a jump or combo where you thought it was well executed. That's what lag will do for you. Your brain is great at masking this up to a certain point as long as it's consistent, which isn't always the case. Enter the MiSTer project. Based on the Altera Cyclone 5 SE FPGA chip, it aims to solve that problem. Instead of using software to emulate the system we are playing with, it actually reconfigures the entire chip to truly try and mimic the hardware being represented. So, when you switch the MiSTer into Super Nintendo mode, it actually is reconfiguring the chip to duplicate it on the hardware layer. You're reproducing the hardware, not the result. The end result from that being a much more accurate representation of the console in question. And when I say accurate, it just feels better. Coupled with a low lag controller option, you may notice that jumps feel better timed. Those combos are now landing correctly and you have an easier time playing. That's what the solution offers you, a near, or in some cases true, experience matching the original system. Since this project is mostly open source, more on that later, a large group of very talented individuals have spent a ton of time developing, honing, and in many cases nearly perfected this solution. Another thing the MiSTer brings to the table is very accurate representations of the audio and video of the systems in question. Colors line up with what the original had where it can, audio is crisp and above all accurate to the games as they were. Something you can even tweak based on your preference. You might like the sound better on a specific Genesis model over the other. That's covered too, and it's easily switched. Slowdowns and artifacts from original hardware is here because again it really tries to replicate it on that layer so you get all of that intact. It really is trying to stay true to the original devices emulated. The device at the heart of the MiSTer project is the Etakneon DE10 Nano development board from Intel. Targeted as a learning platform for engineering students, it's been adapted for our retro-hungry consumption. With the specs of this board, reproduction of systems up to the 32-bit era is looking possible, although anything beyond that may be unlikely until a newer platform comes around. But that means all of your old favorites from the 8 and 16-bit era are well represented. This includes classics such as NES, Genesis, Game Boy, and of course, the SNES. But it also covers many computers from this era. That means machines such as the Apple II, Amiga, Atari ST, and yes, even a 46-DOS PC. As of the making of this video, exciting development on the front of newer systems like the PlayStation and the Saturn are showing a lot of promise but are not yet available. And let's not forget a wide range of arcade games are present. That is to me near perfect reproductions of many arcade classics from titles such as Asteroids, Street Fighter II, Mega Man Power Battles 2 are here, and more are being released at a rapid pace. Each reproduced console, system, or arcade game is referred to as a core. Consider for just a moment how many different consoles, computers, and arcade systems are right now available on the MiSTer, with more arriving constantly. It's mind-blowing what some of these developers have managed to bring to it for everyone's enjoyment. Now to clarify, when I mention near-perfect reproduction, in many cases each individual chip or circuit has to be mapped out in painstaking detail to be used in the project. Sometimes that means literally grinding down a chip to expose the underlying circuitry and then studying it under a microscope. That is the level of detail in play here, which generates a blueprint that can then be used to reproduce the chip, or in this case tell the FPGA chip how to behave. The end result is a gaming experience that is eerily close to the original. Depending on your controller or input choice, you quickly forget you aren't actually playing on original hardware. The actual gaming experience is just phenomenal. But personally, I think the biggest strength of the MiSTer is the versatility and flexibility it provides. Let's explore what I mean by that. Plug in the MiSTer into any modern flat panel TV with HDMI and you're off to the races. Displaying any system or game you want with little fuss, it's very close to turnkey. Should you want to dig deeper here, there is a myriad of settings to satisfy even the most tweak-hungry power user. With flat panel TVs covered, that probably accounts for the vast majority of how people want to use the MiSTer. But what if you prefer playing on a real old-school CRT TV? Does your TV have the red, blue, and green connectors on the back, also referred to as components? No problem. You can either use what's called a direct video output option, which uses the HDMI output with a small dongle to generate a signal your old TV will recognize, or you can go with an entire daughter board called the analog I/O board. It all depends on your setup. But say you're really into old school CRTs and are lucky enough to have a Sony professional monitor, or PVM for short. Sure thing, the analog I/O board has you covered there as well. How about old school PC CRT monitors? Yep, no problem here. What I'm trying to show here is that with just a flip of a few configuration settings, you have a device that is utterly flexible in what displays you can use with it. And something that I really like, both for streaming and recording, is that with the I/O board you can play on a CRT while capturing the video output by HDMI at the same time. Super handy, and all in this one device, with some accessories. The MiSTer is also small enough that it's easy to travel with or move around to where you need it. Oh, and one more thing, for the games that support a vertical view field or Tate mode, the MiSTer has you covered here as well. Shooters and arcade games in this orientation are a blast and feel great to play. Really get that arcade shooter experience going. To plug in gamepads or keyboards and mice, you'll need either a small cheap dongle or what I have here in the USB expansion board. Just about any USB-based controller will work, but there are some exceptions, plus the way many of these controllers are made or wired, the response time may vary greatly. Fortunately, an awesome person in the MiSTer community called Porkchop Express has been working on a master spreadsheet testing out a myriad of controllers for their specific latency. I'll link the spreadsheet below as it's a phenomenal resource to have handy when looking at what controller to buy. But that is to say, if you're starting out, odds are you already have a USB controller, which will work just fine. And I mean just about anything will work. It's super flexible. Add a Bluetooth or RF dongle and you have the option to enjoy your games wirelessly as well. Multiple players can join in easily by simply plugging in additional controllers. The configuration is stored on a micro SD card hidden on the underside of the board right here. To load games or ROMs for the MiSTer to use, you can simply pop that card into your computer and drag files over this way. However, another terrific feature of the MiSTer is that it's easily networkable and allows you to copy files or edit configuration settings in a snap using an internal network. Wired Ethernet connections are supported out of the box, but if you'd like to use a wireless dongle, that works just great too. The MiSTer is controlled through what I'd call a basic by design interface. It doesn't try to be anything fancy with box art of games or something over the top. It's functional, fast, and to the point. Since features vary by core and what has been added to them, each time you load up a system you will get a different set of options. This interface and most of the non-core related tasks such as networking is handled by a small integrated ARM processor running Linux. With so many features across all the cores, it's hard to make a concise list, but here are just some of my favorites, to name a few. This list can really go on, and remember, we're still just talking about this one device. New features are coming out frequently, and sometimes out of the blue a new core or awesome feature will drop with little warning due to the number of people working on this project. If I covered all the cores that MiSTer supports, this video would be very long, so look for separate coverage of those in future videos. Here's just a sample of what sort of systems and games you can experience on the MiSTer today. More cores are continually released, further expanding your options.
Reinforcements have arrived.
Reporting. Right away, sir.
Construction complete. New construction.
Alright, so maybe you're thinking, okay, great Rick, I want to get in on this, but where do I even start? Well, it depends on how deep you want to go and what you want to use it for. We get to the point most people react to, which is the price. The DE10 Nano board itself doesn't come very cheap, and expect to pay around $200 for it just in the base form. To play most cores, you'll need a memory module as well, which can be had for about $30 to $60 depending on the size and type of games you want to play. You'll also need a cheap USB dongle to get controller support, plus a micro SD card to hold the configuration in games. After that, you're set to experience most of what the MiSTer has to offer, with options to expand it later on, like I did with mine. Sure, that isn't cheap compared to, say, a Raspberry Pi, but personally it's hard to argue what you get out of it. It's by far my favorite retro piece of technology I've bought in a long time, and it's become my go-to device for playing retro games or tinkering with some computers I never got to experience originally. This tiny device does so many things. When we put it all together, I think the price is justified. If you're interested in just a portion of it, like the 16-bit consoles, consider all the extra pieces a bonus. For myself, the odds of me buying and getting into the Atari ST platform at this point is pretty slim, but here I can experience it in a close to true form right on my MiSTer, usually with not much setup required. It's the device that keeps on giving and giving. If you'd like to read up more on the MiSTer, there's an excellent GitHub page dedicated to the project that goes into further details, including lists of cores that are available. And remember, this product is open source, which means just about anyone who has the skill set can pick up any number of tasks to improve cores or add more functionality. And I say open source with one caveat. One of the amazing developers for the MiSTer goes by the name of Hotego, and is responsible for a tremendous amount of arcade cores being ported over. We have him to thank for numerous true-to-life arcade experiences, and I won't go too deep into the details, but some of his work can't be considered open source in the truest sense, but they're still eventually all released publicly. That said, I think the community owes him a great debt for all his hard work and what he's bringing to the MiSTer for all of us to enjoy. Now this video could go on forever because not only do I love this little device so much, but it can do so many things. I can't begin to cover everything it can do, but as I both expand what I use the MiSTer for and as features and cores continue to be released, I'll have plenty more to talk about. And just to be clear, I bought all the parts you've seen in this video with my own money. It may seem like I'm trying to be a shill for the project, but I'm actually just that passionate about it. I can't think of any other device that has changed how I enjoy retro as much as this little unassuming device has. Anyway, for now we'll end this video, but keep an eye on the channel for future ones with additional deep dives into the wonderful world of the MiSTer project. I hope you found this informational and are now as excited as I am about this little unassuming device, with a lot of ports and maybe, just maybe, a sprinkle of magic. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this piece about the MiSTer, perhaps you'd like to check out some of my other videos. I cover a wide range of retro topics, including live streams featuring this very MiSTer. You can find me on social media, on my website, or catch me live at 8:45 p.m. Central on Thursdays.